Jin-woo, a successful and strikingly handsome Korean mafia, seemed to have it all except for love. After a series of failed blind dates, he never imagined he would find himself drawn to Sandra, a compassionate African waitress from a world so far removed from his own. But when the weight of family power and fear threatens to tear them apart, can their love withstand the forces of destiny? Get ready for a thrilling story of passion, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of true love. The night was alive with the hum of the storm, the rain pounding relentlessly on the streets of Seoul, as if the sky itself was in turmoil. Thunder rumbled in the distance, sending a deep tremor through the city. The neon lights from the street lamps reflected in the puddles, glowing like shards of broken glass scattered across the road. A sleek, black luxury car skidded into the narrow alley, its tires screeching as it came to a halt. The door swung open and Jin-woo stepped out, his silhouette cutting through the rain. A sharp, commanding figure, tall and imposing, with a presence that seemed to suck the air out of the space around him. His tailored suit clung to his muscular frame, his black hair swept back effortlessly, and his eyes, cold, dark, were the eyes of a man who ruled an empire of fear. Jin-woo didn't flinch as the rain poured down. He didn't need to. The storm, just like the world he controlled, didn't bother him. His bodyguards, loyal and always at the ready, followed in step behind him, their eyes scanning every corner, ensuring no threat went unnoticed. The air was thick with tension as they approached the entrance of a small, modest restaurant. But Jin-woo wasn't concerned with the rain or his reputation tonight. His mind was somewhere else, consumed by something, someone, that had unexpectedly slipped past his defences. He took his phone from his pocket, his fingers moving like they had a mind of their own. The screen lit up with a new message. "We have her. If you want her, you know what to do. Your empire or her." The words hit like a punch to the gut, the kind of punch a man like Jin-woo had never been prepared for. His empire, his family, his power, all meaningless now. A woman was at the centre of it all, and he had no idea how or why, but she had already become the one thing he couldn't control. Inside the restaurant, Sandra stood behind the counter, wiping down a table, humming softly to herself. The warm, comforting glow of the restaurant's lights contrasted with the violent storm raging outside. She had no idea that the storm inside Jin-woo's world was about to make landfall in her own. Her life was simple: work hard, send money back home to her family, and keep her head down. She wasn't concerned with the rich, powerful men who visited the restaurant. She'd served countless high-profile people without batting an eye. None of them were worth remembering. But there was something different about this man, the one who had just walked in. Sandra paused when she saw him. Jin-woo. The man who had entered the restaurant like he owned it, his presence more commanding than anyone else in the room. He wasn't just another businessman. There was something dark about him, something dangerous that she could feel, even from across the room. Jin-woo sat down at an empty table, his eyes scanning the room, but his focus remained fixed on her, Sandra, the waitress. Her simple beauty was the first thing that stood out to him, her dark skin glowing under the soft lighting, her bright eyes full of life. But it was her presence that kept him rooted to his seat. She wasn't fawning over him, wasn't afraid of his reputation, and she wasn't looking at him like everyone else did, with admiration, fear, or desire. She treated him like he was just another man. He was used to being worshipped, feared, and adored. But with her, it was different. Sandra walked over, her steps light and confident. As she reached his table, she smiled politely, not recognizing the man in front of her. She didn't know who he was, or how dangerous he could be. She just knew he was looking at her in a way that made her uneasy. but she couldn't quite place why. "Good evening, sir. What would you like to order?" she asked, her voice warm but with a hint of curiosity. Jin-woo blinked, suddenly caught off guard. The words were supposed to come easily. He was the man who had all the answers, the one who had controlled every interaction in his life. Yet, in that moment, he found himself at a loss. "I'll have water," he said, his voice hoarse, trying to shake the unexpected feeling that had gripped him. Sandra raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Are you sure? We have some really good jollof rice. It's a favourite among foreigners." Jin-woo wasn't sure what jollof rice was, but for some inexplicable reason, he found himself nodding. "I'll have that," he replied. Sandra smiled, turned, and walked away, her figure disappearing behind the kitchen door. Jin-woo sat there staring at the empty space she had just occupied, his thoughts racing. The conversation had been brief, but in it something had shifted. He had come to this restaurant looking for nothing more than a meal, another mundane moment in his already controlled, predictable life. But something about her had unsettled him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't used to feeling vulnerable. He wasn't used to being anything but the one in control. Yet this woman, this waitress, had managed to pierce through the walls he had so carefully built around himself. She didn't care who he was, didn't care about the wealth or power he controlled. For the first time, Jin-woo felt the stirrings of something he had long buried: desire. The restaurant began to empty out, and Sandra was finishing up her shift. She didn't see Jin-woo's gaze following her every move. She didn't know that the storm outside had just become a storm inside her life, one that would change everything. As she walked out into the alley after her shift, the rain still falling in heavy sheets, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to look to know it was him. Jin-woo. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned around to face him. He stood there in the rain, the cold reflection of the city lights catching the glint in his eyes. His expression was unreadable, but there was a fire in his gaze that made her skin prickle. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low yet commanding. Sandra's instincts told her to walk away, to run even. But something in the way he said those words stopped her. "No," she replied, her voice steady but wary. "I don't think you should." But Jin-woo didn't back down. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I don't want to leave here without you," he said, his words hanging in the air like a dare. The rain seemed to intensify as the seconds stretched, the weight of the moment heavy between them. Sandra's heart raced, 1,000 thoughts swirling in her head. She didn't know who this man was, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was dangerous, yet despite the fear creeping up her spine, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life, her quiet, simple life, was about to be completely upended by this man who stood before her, this man who was more than just a Mafia boss. He was a storm. Stick with us, because this love story will test the very limits of power, sacrifice, and what it means to fight for love in a world full of darkness. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories, and don't forget to tell us where you are watching from. The rain fell heavier now, each drop like a hammer on the pavement, the streets almost deserted as the night deepened. Sandra stood frozen in the alley, her eyes locked with Jin-woo's, 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. She should be afraid. She should walk away and never look back, but something kept her rooted to the spot, the weight of his gaze pulling her in like gravity. "I don't want to leave here without you," Jin-woo repeated, his voice deeper, almost pleading. It was a side of him no one had ever seen. The man who commanded fear now stood before her, vulnerable in a way she wasn't sure he even understood. Sandra stepped back, her chest tight. She had to say something, anything to get herself back to a place of safety. She was just a waitress, a simple woman trying to build a life in this foreign city. She didn't belong in the world of power and violence Jin Woo lived in. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Why me?" Jin Woo didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers, and for a moment the world seemed to pause around them. The rain, the storm, the city, they all faded as he reached out, his hand almost touching her arm. "I can't explain it," he said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "But I can't let you go. Not without knowing who you are. Not without knowing what this could be." Sandra felt her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't just his words, it was the intensity in his eyes, the way he was looking at her like he might never see anything else in his life again. She had never seen a man so caught in his emotions, so raw, and for a second she wondered if she was making a mistake by staying. But then she remembered the warning, the message she had received earlier. "He's dangerous. Stay away." Sandra took a step back, shaking her head slightly. "I don't belong in your world, Jin Woo. You don't even know me." Jin Woo's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening as he stepped even closer. He wasn't used to this kind of resistance. No one ever told him no. No one ever walked away from him. But Sandra, she had done both. "I know enough to know you're not like anyone I've ever met," he said quietly. "You don't care about who I am. You don't care about my money, my status. That's what I need." Sandra looked up at him, confusion and fear mixing in her chest. But there was something else too, something that stirred deep inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. What if this was different? What if he wasn't the monster everyone said he was? Before she could answer, the sound of a car screeching to a halt down the alley interrupted them. Sandra's heart raced as she saw a black sedan pull up at the far end of the street. The door opened and two men in suits stepped out. Their eyes immediately locked onto Jin Woo. Sandra's pulse quickened. She hadn't seen them before, but their presence was enough to tell her something was wrong. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was part of something much bigger. Jin Woo's gaze flickered over his shoulder, and the briefest moment of tension passed between them. "They're here," he muttered under his breath, stepping in front of Sandra as though instinctively shielding her. "Who are they?" Sandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They work for the people I'm trying to avoid," Jin Woo replied, his voice hardening again. The warmth that had briefly softened him vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating expression that Sandra had first seen in him. "But they don't get to take you." Before Sandra could respond, the two men moved toward them, their pace quickening as they neared the alley. Jin Woo's hand clenched into a fist at his side, his eyes locked on them with the intensity of a predator. The first man spoke, his voice low but commanding. "Jin Woo," he said, "it's time to come back. Your family needs you. Your empire is falling apart, and you're here, with her." He sneered, his gaze flicking to Sandra like she was a mere distraction. Sandra's stomach churned. The words didn't make sense, but the tension was so thick it felt suffocating. Jin Woo didn't move, his posture straight and unyielding. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold. "And if you think for a second that I'll let you touch her, you're making the biggest mistake of your life." The men exchanged glances, their hands inching toward the guns hidden beneath their coats. Sandra's heart raced as the situation shifted, the danger suddenly palpable. "Jin Woo," the second man said, a mocking tone in his voice, "do you really think she's worth it? The woman who'll drag you down, your family, your business, you'll lose it all over a woman like her." Sandra's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea who these men were, but one thing was certain: they weren't here to talk. Without warning, the first man lunged forward, his hand reaching for his weapon. Jin-woo reacted in an instant, stepping in front of Sandra and shoving her out of the way with surprising gentleness for someone so used to violence. He spun toward the men, his fist flying with brutal precision. Sandra stumbled back against the alley wall, her heart hammering in her chest. She could hear the fight intensifying, the sound of punches landing, the grunts of men in pain. Jin-woo was handling them, but with every blow he landed, the tension in her chest grew heavier. She didn't know who these men were, but she knew one thing: they were here for her. As the last man crumpled to the ground, Jin-woo stood over him, his breathing steady but his gaze dark and filled with fury. He turned toward Sandra, his expression softening for just a second. "You're not safe here," he said quietly. "They'll come for you again, and next time it'll be worse." Sandra's mind was spinning, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of his words settling into her bones. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was part of something that had the power to destroy her, and her world was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to comprehend. Stay tuned as Jin-woo faces the greatest choice of his life. Will he choose love, or will his enemies tear everything apart? The rain continued to pour down in sheets, soaking Jin-woo to the bone as he stood in the alleyway, his eyes still locked onto Sandra. The fight with the men from earlier had ended, but the war inside him was far from over. He could feel the weight of his empire on his shoulders, the crushing responsibility of keeping his family's name intact. But it was all starting to feel like a facade. Sandra was standing there, only a few feet away, her eyes filled with confusion, hurt, and something else, something that mirrored his own emotions. He had always been in control, the one pulling the strings, the one who never let anyone get too close. But she had gotten close, too close. For the first time in years, Jin-woo wasn't sure of anything. "I told you to leave," Sandra said, her voice breaking through the tension. "I don't belong in your world. This chaos, it's not my fight." Jin-woo's jaw clenched as he took a step toward her, the intensity of his gaze never wavering. "You're already in it, Sandra," he said, his voice low and hard. "You have been from the moment we met. I can't change that, and neither can you." Sandra shook her head, stepping back, trying to put distance between them. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her words quiet but filled with emotion. "I didn't ask to be dragged into your world, your fight." "You're not just in my world now," Jin-woo replied, his voice softer, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it before. "You've become part of it, whether you like it or not." Sandra turned away from him, her hand gripping the railing of the alley's fire escape as she stared out into the storm. The sound of the rain mixed with the roar of thunder, but her mind was somewhere else, far from the chaos and violence she had just witnessed. "I didn't choose this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking aloud made the truth somehow more real. "I came here for a new life. I just wanted something better for myself and my family. I didn't know I'd end up in the middle of all of this." Jin-woo approached her slowly, cautiously, as if trying to gauge the distance between them, not just physically, but emotionally. His chest tightened as he looked at her. He had never imagined that someone like her, someone so innocent, so untouched by his world, would matter to him. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him, her vulnerability breaking through his hardened exterior. "You didn't ask for it," he said, his voice laced with something deeper, "but you're here now. And I can't just walk away from you." Sandra's body stiffened at his words. She turned to face him, her eyes flashing with a mixture of frustration and fear. "I don't know what you want from me, Jin-woo. You're asking me to trust you, but I barely know who you really are. All I know is that I'm standing here, feeling like I'm going to lose everything if I stay in this." Jinwoo stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't want you to trust me just because I say so. I want to prove to you that you can trust me, that I can protect you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and fraught with meaning. Sandra could see the sincerity in his eyes, but she wasn't sure if it was enough. She wasn't sure if it could be enough to undo the damage that had already been done. The tension between them grew, thick and suffocating, until Sandra could no longer ignore the fear gnawing at her insides. She had seen Jinwoo's power firsthand, and as much as he spoke of protecting her, she couldn't ignore the fact that his world was filled with enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use her as leverage against him. "Do you think they'll stop because you want to protect me?" she asked, her voice laced with bitterness. "Do you think the people who've been hunting you will suddenly care about your feelings? They'll come for me. They'll hurt me to get to you." Jinwoo's eyes darkened as the weight of her words hit him. "I won't let that happen," he said firmly, taking another step forward. "I can't promise that everything will be easy or that you'll be safe all the time, but I can promise you this: I will fight for you. I will make sure they never touch you." Sandra stepped back, her mind reeling with the intensity of his words. She had never been a part of a world like this, a world where violence was a constant, where power and control ruled every decision. But in that moment, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. She wasn't just in danger because of who Jinwoo was. She was in danger because she had let herself care. She had let herself believe that she could be part of this world, that she could be more than just a waitress in a foreign city. And now, the price for that belief was higher than she could ever have imagined. "I don't want to be a part of your world, Jinwoo," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "but somehow I'm already in it." Jinwoo stood there, his face hardening again, but the vulnerability from earlier never fully left his eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm not going to let you go." The storm outside grew fiercer as the two of them stood there in silence, the weight of their unspoken emotions pressing down on them. Sandra could feel the electricity between them, the pull of something she wasn't ready for but couldn't seem to resist. She wanted to push him away. She wanted to walk out of that alley and never look back. But the truth was, she couldn't. Not anymore. The connection between them, no matter how dangerous, had already taken root, and somewhere deep down she realized that part of her didn't want to walk away, not from him, not from the man who, despite his darkness, had shown her a side of himself she hadn't expected. Suddenly the sound of tires screeching broke through the tension, and Sandra's heart skipped a beat. She looked around, her pulse quickening as a black SUV pulled into the alley, its headlights blinding in the darkness. The car came to a screeching halt, and two men, dressed in dark suits, stepped out, their eyes locking onto Jinwoo and Sandra. Jinwoo's expression immediately shifted back to cold calculation. He stepped in front of Sandra instinctively, blocking her from their view. "Sandra," he said quietly, "stay behind me." The two men approached, their steps deliberate. The tension in the air was suffocating, and Sandra could feel the fear building in her chest. She had no idea who these men were, but their presence was unmistakable. Jinwoo's bodyguards moved to intercept the men, but Jinwoo raised a hand, signalling for them to stay back. The men didn't speak at first, but their eyes were locked on him. "We need to talk," one of them finally said, his voice clipped as though he was used to being obeyed. "Now?" Jinwoo didn't flinch. His gaze was sharp, but his jaw was set, determined. I'm done talking." The words were simple, but they carried an undeniable weight. And in that moment, Sandra realized something. Jinwoo was done. He was done pretending to follow the rules. He was done holding back. And that meant everyone around him, including her, was about to be dragged into the storm. The storm is far from over. Will Jinwoo be able to protect Sandra from the dangers that surround them, or will his enemies tear them apart? Stick with us to find out. The rain had subsided, but the storm in the alley had only just begun. The men in suits stood before them, cold eyes fixed on Jinwoo, who was standing protectively in front of Sandra. The air between them crackled with a dangerous intensity, like two opposing forces about to collide. One of the men, taller and broader than the other, stepped forward. His face was hardened, his jaw clenched, as if he'd seen far too many battles. His voice was laced with authority, and it wasn't a request, it was an order. "We need to talk, Jinwoo," the man said, his eyes never leaving Jinwoo. "Now!" Sandra could feel the tension thickening in the air. She had no idea who these men were, but one thing was clear. They weren't here to talk. She could see the way they looked at Jinwoo, like he was their master, their leader, their king. And she wondered just how much power this man wielded. Jinwoo didn't flinch. His posture remained strong, unyielding, and yet Sandra could sense the change in him. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was something personal, something deep, and she was now part of it. "I said I'm done talking," Jinwoo repeated, his voice colder now, cutting through the tension. "You've been warned. Stay away from her." The men exchanged a look, one that Sandra couldn't quite read, but she could feel the shift in the air. The taller man sneered, clearly unimpressed with Jinwoo's words. "She's not the only one you're going to have to protect, Jinwoo," he said with a low growl, stepping even closer. "You've made a mistake, a big one." Sandra's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't stop herself from glancing at Jinwoo. Who were these people? Why were they threatening him? But Jinwoo's eyes remained focused on the man before him, his jaw tight as though he was prepared to face whatever came next. "Get out of my way." His voice was like ice, but there was a fire behind his eyes, an undeniable strength. The men didn't move. In fact, the tension only deepened. The standoff was inevitable. Jinwoo's bodyguards started to move in, but once again he raised a hand to stop them. "This isn't your fight," he said, his voice firm. His eyes never left the men. "I'll handle this." Sandra took a step back, her body tense, unsure of what would happen next. She wanted to scream, to run, to get out of there. But she couldn't tear her eyes away from the man standing in front of her. Jinwoo, the man who had already promised to protect her, a promise he could not keep if these men destroyed him. The shorter man took a few steps toward Jinwoo, his face devoid of emotion. "You really think you can stand against the entire family, huh?" His voice was like a knife, cutting through the charged silence. Jinwoo didn't back down. He stood taller, more resolute than ever. "I've been standing against your family for years," he replied, his voice low but fierce. "You think I'm scared of you?" The taller man smirked, taking another step forward, his hand moving toward the gun hidden beneath his jacket. Sandra's breath hitched in her chest. Her heart thudded loudly in her ears as the intensity of the moment reached a boiling point. Everything was happening so fast, so violently, and she was caught in the middle. The thought of being so close to the kind of danger she had only seen in movies terrified her, but it also intrigued her. This man, Jinwoo, had the kind of power that made men like this bow down. Jinwoo's eyes flickered to Sandra for just a fraction of a second, but in that moment, everything changed. "Move her," the taller man said to his associate. The command was cold, and Sandra could feel the air shift. Before she could react, the man reached for her arm. Without thinking, Jin Woo reacted. He lunged, grabbing the man by the wrist and twisting it with brutal force. The crunch of bone was enough to make anyone wince. "Don't touch her," Jin Woo warned in a low growl, his grip tightening as he spun the man around, slamming him into the brick wall. The smaller man stepped forward, pulling out a weapon, his eyes wild with rage, his finger twitching on the trigger. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. This was it. They were going to fight, and she, in the middle of it, was no better than a pawn caught in a war between titans. But then, in a split second, Jin Woo did the unthinkable. He dropped the man to the ground, eyes locked on him with a deep fury. "I'll make you regret this," he said softly. "You're not the first to try, and you won't be the last." Sandra was stunned into silence. The force of Jin Woo's movements, the speed with which he took control of the situation, left her breathless. She had never seen anyone handle a threat with such cold efficiency. The men in suits stood still, unsure whether to push further. The air between them and Jin Woo was thick with danger. The power, the control, the sheer force of his presence. They had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. Sandra couldn't take her eyes off him. The violence, the tension, the danger, it was all so raw. And yet, through it all, Jin Woo's gaze never wavered. His focus was unbroken, like a man who had accepted his fate. But had he accepted hers too? "Let her go," the tall man spat, his face twisted with anger as he clutched his broken wrist. Jin Woo didn't even flinch. "You'll regret ever stepping foot in my city." With that, the men backed away slowly, their eyes never leaving Jin Woo, the weight of the threat between them palpable. They could see the fire in his eyes, the unyielding power he commanded. They knew they'd lost this round, but it wouldn't be the last time they crossed paths. As the men retreated into the darkness, Sandra remained frozen, her heart still pounding in her chest. Jin Woo turned back to her, his expression softening as he wiped the rain from his face. He had just risked everything to protect her. Sandra's voice broke through the silence, shaky but filled with a question that had been lingering in her mind since the moment she met him. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" Jin Woo didn't answer right away. He stood there looking at her, his eyes unreadable. But there was something different in his gaze now, a quiet storm behind them. "Because I can't lose you," he said softly. "Not again. Not like this." Sandra's chest tightened as the weight of his words settled on her heart. She didn't know how to process what was happening between them, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going anywhere now. "The storm isn't over. Will Jin Woo continue to protect Sandra, or will the dangers of his world destroy them both? Stay with us to find out." Certainly, here's Batch 5, the final part of the story, where the emotional and physical stakes come to a head, culminating in a powerful, dramatic conclusion. In this batch, we will see the consequences of Jin Woo's decisions, the final clash of forces, and the resolution of Jin Woo and Sandra's emotional journey. The city felt different after the fight. The streets were quieter, the air heavier, and yet, in the midst of it all, Jin Woo and Sandra stood in a fragile moment of peace. But the danger hadn't passed. It was only growing closer. The events of the night had changed everything. For Sandra, the lines between her former life and the world Jin Woo inhabited were now permanently blurred. She couldn't go back to the way things were. She couldn't pretend she wasn't now a part of something much bigger, much darker. And for Jin Woo, there was no turning back either. He had always been a man who ruled with fear and precision, never allowing himself to get emotionally entangled. But Sandra had done what no one had ever done. She had made him feel. Now, he stood on the edge of losing everything, His empire, his legacy, his life, all of it was at risk. And at the centre of it all, the woman who had become his world. "We need to leave," Jinwoo said, his voice low but urgent. He stood by the door of his penthouse, his gaze fixed on Sandra as she stood across from him, her arms crossed, her expression uncertain. Sandra had heard him. She had felt the weight of his words from the moment he first promised to protect her. But the reality of the situation was different now. The world Jinwoo was asking her to enter was dangerous, ruthless, and she wasn't sure she could survive it. "I can't leave," Sandra replied softly, her voice betraying her internal struggle. "I can't just run away. I've never run away from anything in my life." She moved toward him, her steps deliberate. But there was an undercurrent of fear in the way she carried herself. The fear wasn't of him, but of what they were about to face. "You're already running, Sandra." Jinwoo's voice cracked with emotion, the mask of the Mafia boss slipping just slightly. "You can't pretend you don't care anymore. You're already in this world. You've already made a choice, whether you realize it or not." Sandra's chest tightened as she took in his words. She wasn't running from him, no. She was running from the chaos he carried with him. But when she looked at him now, standing there in the storm of his world, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. The sound of a car horn broke the moment of silence. Sandra's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. They were coming for her. She glanced at Jinwoo, and the fear in his eyes mirrored hers. He had been trying to shield her, to keep her safe, but the truth was, there was no safety for someone like her. She had become part of his world now, whether she liked it or not. "Jinwoo," Sandra whispered, her voice shaky, "we have to get out of here. They're not going to stop. I know that now." Jinwoo didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand, pulling her close, his eyes never leaving hers. "I promised you," he said softly. "I will protect you, and I will keep that promise, no matter what it costs." One of the men, Kyung, a cold, calculating figure, stepped forward. "She's a liability, Jinwoo," he said with a sneer. "You've already made your choice, but now it's time to choose again. Your empire or her. You can't have both." Jinwoo stood his ground, his gaze unwavering, his grip tightened around Sandra's hand. "I don't care about the empire anymore." The words struck like a blow. "What?" Kyung asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're giving it all up for her." "I am," Jinwoo said simply, his voice steady. "And if you try to stop me, you'll regret it." Sandra's heart raced as the tension in the room thickened. This was the moment when everything would either shatter or fall into place. She knew that Jinwoo was about to lose everything he had worked for, his family, his power, his wealth. It was all at stake, for her. But what was she willing to give up for him? "You don't get to walk away from this," Kyung spat, his eyes narrowing as he motioned to the two other men. "Not unless you want to drag us down with you." Without warning, one of the men raised his gun, pointing it directly at Jinwoo. Sandra felt her blood run cold, but before she could react, Jinwoo stepped in front of her, his body a shield. In that moment, everything changed. The gunshot rang out. Sandra screamed as she saw Jinwoo stumble backward, his hand gripping his side. Blood stained his shirt, instantly dark and spreading fast. "No!" Sandra cried, rushing toward him. Her heart pounded in her chest as she knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. Jinwoo winced but smiled weakly up at her. "I told you," he whispered, his voice strained. "I'd keep my promise." Sandra's heart shattered as she held him. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. This wasn't how it was supposed to end, but just as quickly as it had started, the door burst open again. Jinwoo's remaining allies, those who still respected him, came pouring into the room, guns drawn, eyes fierce. "Get him out of here!" one of them shouted, and the men swarmed in to drag the other two away, their expressions full of anger and disbelief. With a final strained effort, Jin-woo was pulled to his feet, and Sandra clung to him, tears streaming down her face. "We're leaving," he muttered weakly. "I'm taking you away from all of this." Their story is just beginning. Will love survive the darkness? Or will it be swallowed whole by the world they've tried to escape? Find out in the next chapter.